All right, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's well, had a good weekend. Hope everybody's ready to learn some more. We're going to keep going with the Great Depression. This is taking a long time. That's what a depression is like, right? It kind of drags on. I've had a couple of students ask questions about the Fireside chats and what those were about and how those could have been helpful. Let me just explain them and their importance using the first one, which was probably the most important of them. Shortly after Roosevelt took office, he created this idea of communicating with the American people through this new medium of the radio. So take a second, get your notebook, get ready to go. We're going to talk about the Fireside chats and the banking crisis. So you all know that when Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, the country was in the depths of the Great Depression. For the past 4 years, the economy had done nothing but spiral downward. There were a lot of things that were bad, a lot of problems that were caused by that downward spiral, not the least of which was unemployment. We've talked about that already, how many people were out of work or underemployed, only working half-time, or had given up even trying to find work. Business closings, deflation. Prices kept going down to the point where companies couldn't actually sell things for enough money to make a profit. Really bad. When you see deflation in an economy, you're seeing the worst that an economy can get. But one of the worst aspects of the economic decline was something known as the bank crisis or the banking crisis. You remember how banks work. When you put your money in the bank, they don't just put it in a vault and keep it. What they do is loan it to somebody else. That way they can make money on your money. They offer you interest or a portion of what they make in order to do that. So you put your $1,000 in the bank and they give you 2% interest at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, instead of $1,000, it's $1,020. Just because it sat there, but it's not sitting there. They're loaning it to somebody else for a home mortgage or a business loan, and they're getting back interest on those loans for 5%. And everybody's happy. The people who get the loans get a chance to buy a house or start a business. The bank makes money on the loans they put out there, and you make money on the money that you have sitting in the bank. Without the ability of banks to loan money, economies falter and stagnate. But it all hedges on the bank being able to always have enough money on hand for depositors to take some out when they need to. I've got my $1,000 in the bank, but I might need $20 this month because I've got a doctor's appointment or I need to buy some furniture, so I need to take some out of the bank. As long as they have enough on hand to handle that, it all works. The problem with the late 1920s and early 1930s was people no longer trusted the banks to be able to hold on to their money. Banks had made some stupid investments. Instead of loaning money to people for mortgages, they were investing in the stock market, and we saw what happened to the stock market. Plus, people were losing their jobs and were unable to pay some of their loans back. Farmers were the first to have this problem with the huge farm crisis because they borrowed money during the war to buy new land and equipment, but homeowners in general and business owners were going out of business and unable to pay back their loans to the banks. So some banks were struggling. Now, most were fine as long as everybody didn't try to take their money out of the bank at the same time. The problem arose when somebody got the idea that a bank was in trouble. Now, what are you going to do if you've got your money in the bank and you're afraid it's going to go out of business? You're going to go take your money out. Right? It just makes sense. So if the bank goes out of business, you lose everything you've got deposited. So people would go to the bank and take their money out, but they wouldn't just go to the bank and take their money out. They would tell their friends, you better get your money out of the bank before it goes under. And it led to panics where people would rush to the bank and take their money out of the bank. It's called a bank run or a run on the bank. Suddenly, the bank would not have enough money to handle all of the people who wanted to take their money out at the same time. It would lead to the bank having to close their doors and declare themselves bankrupt. sometimes offering people a few cents on it for every dollar they had in the bank. This was happening all over the country. It started in farming regions and then spread across the country. Thousands of banks were closing their doors every year. At one point in 1933, it was up to something like 20 banks a day would be closing because of these bank runs. Now, Roosevelt comes into office and he's got to do something about the economy right away. He promises people he's going to get stuff done, and he puts in measures to try and fix the banking crisis long term. But in the short term, he's got to do something to stop the crisis right now. So he calls for one of these radio addresses. A fireside chat, and he has the staff put a fire in the fireplace in the West Wing, and he sits down next to it with a microphone so people can hear the fire crackling in the background, and he has a conversation with the American people. He was a great communicator. This is one of his great strengths as a president. He could make people feel as though he was not talking down to them, even though he was a college-educated, Harvard-educated, rich guy. He could make the average Joe Schmo worker feel as though he was a friend of his. Everybody sat down and listened to him. The whole country paused and turned on their radios and listened to the president, and he said, listen, everybody, we can fix this. All you've got to do is not panic. In his inaugural address, he had said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And here was the best example of that. Because people were afraid of the banks were failing. They feared the bank would fail, they ran to the bank to take their money out, and because of that, the bank did fail. Self-fulfilling prophecy. So he explained the problem in very simple terms so that the average American could get it, could figure out what the problem was. Then he said, here's what we're going to do about it. We're going to close all the banks in the country. We're calling it a bank holiday. And Congress has already put the bill on my desk to sign. I'm going to sign that bill, and they're all going to be closed. You still have to pay your mortgage and send your money to the bank, but their doors aren't going to be open. Nobody can withdraw money from the banks for the next 2 weeks. During that time, federal investigators are going to go to every single bank in the country and check their books and make sure they have enough money on hand. And if they don't, we're not going to let them open in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, when the banks open again, if your bank is open, you know it's safe because we've checked it. You don't have to be afraid. And he talked to them in such a way that they got it and understood, and the bank holiday extended a little farther than he had planned because they couldn't get to all the banks within that time period. But when they were done and opened the banks again, for the first time in 3 years, more people deposited money in the bank than took money out. It was the end of the bank crisis, right there. He ended the bank crisis by talking, by nothing more than talking to the American people as if they were friends of his. And he became so popular for this, for his ability to get things across to people, that hundreds of thousands of Americans wrote letters to him, sometimes just saying, hi, how you doing? They seemed to think he was a friend of theirs. He had to actually hire a whole new staff just to answer his letters, because Americans sent him letters saying, I just wanted to say hi, how's Eleanor doing? My dad's having trouble. And his staff of letter answerers had, stock answers for everybody who sent him a letter. He saw almost none of them, but he got bags of mail every day from average Americans who felt a connection to him. He was a communicator. The bank crisis doesn't end entirely because he talked to them. It does. The bank holiday does a lot, and then he pushes through the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which makes sure these things aren't going to happen again. This is the reading you're going to do tonight. Or today, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation comes up and it guarantees people's bank deposits. It puts an insurance policy to fix them. But the crisis ended because of Roosevelt talking and his fireside chats. They become incredibly popular. You could hear him talking. If you walked through New York City during one of his fireside chats, you would probably never miss a single word of his speech, because everybody in the summertime would have their windows open and everybody was listening to the president. That's the Fireside Chats. You have a lovely day. We'll talk again soon.